You have somewhere in your pile a side by side. We got when we took this up last time. And so far, this is the most uncontroversial miscellaneous tax I've seen in a while, but we may fix that.
That's what I say, now that you said that,
Inventory the uncollected existing lawful taxes on communication. Miscellaneous tax, if a place to call for such thing to happen.
If you wish to draft something, Senator, we will consider it.
Okay, whatever was being suggested to go on the appropriations collection. Such taxes.
It's a study. Appropriations knows about the issue.
And why don't they study some appropriations, while we should study uncollected taxes?
I am going right now to continue. Okay, we are starting with this is 471, and we've got Representative Kate Lally and Kate, just tell us what section. I've got a note that this says addition of language. Is that you or?
No.
Okay.
No,
That's
page 166.
Yes, okay, well, it says addition of language from 166, so that's
okay.
you, all right.
Smile.
We don't,
So is
and
this
I
the
did
tax
promise
bill?
we would be nice. I only yell at my committee. Okay, so.
Only one call.
Okay, let's just, yeah, you know the drill, just introduce yourself to the record and tell us what you would like us to do.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Kate Lally, Representative Kate Lally of Shelburne, and I am here to offer testimony in support of H-166 to your committee. So the goal and purpose of this bill is to realign the Vermont tax treatment for medical deductions with the federal tax treatment by eliminating the deduction eliminating the limit on deducting medical expenses made to continuing care retirement communities, which I'll refer to as CCRCs, if that's okay from here on. So CCRCs are a potentially very beneficial healthcare option that could be made available to middle-income Vermont seniors. If we,
Okay, there is only one, right?
yes, currently there's only one, and that's in my district, and it's Wake Robin. And there's a resident who is available to offer testimony on this.
And Wake Robin is the only one
Currently,
having marketed a senior living facility, is the only one to be a total care facility in the state. You must have everything from independent to nursing home, and Wake Robin is the only one that has actually had, I think, a nursing home as part of its facility prior to the state doing that definition of, is it total? No, it's life care, I think. But none since then there have been several senior living independent and up to assisted living, but none have chosen to put in a nursing home today.
correct, yes.
And Wake Robin also is one of two facilities that does not accept Medicaid.
I believe that they do in the assisted living and continuing care portions of.
They do.
I believe so,
Can you
and
check that? Because that would be a change. They didn't accept Medicare last time we looked at, or Medicaid last time.
Medicaid.
Medicaid.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you said Medicare.
No, Medicaid.
Yes, that, I don't know if they, I can't speak to that,
Yeah.
but I will find that out.
There's a nursing home in Woodstock and Wake Robin with the two facilities that whenever we do something, they don't get benefited because they don't pay Medicaid.
Okay, okay,
Provider taxes where they lose out.
okay, all right. So as you were saying, Madam Chair, CCRCs do provide housing and access to a spectrum of medical care in the same community, and it's prepaid. So the fees at these institutions are the mechanism to prepay the medical expenses and provide the funding so residents will be taken care of even if their funds are exhausted. And the fees do not change with the level of care. And this was annual calculated medical portion of the fees deducted for federal purposes were an allowable deduction until 2018 in Vermont, and that we are asked, just to be clear, we are asking for this to be reinstated. So CCRCs can provide, I think, some significant benefits to Vermont that align with some of our policy objectives that the General Assembly is working hard to advance. Specifically, they can provide more housing to Vermonters. There is a very well-documented lack of what's called step-down housing options for seniors of all income ranges and especially for middle-income seniors, which keeps many of them stuck in homes that no longer meet their needs. Many people are trying to adapt their homes to age in place. But there are many others for whom this is just not going to be a viable option.
Do you know what's the buy-in and what's the fees at? Because my impression has always been that it was not accessible to middle income.
So at Wake Robin, there are a range of price points, and we will be hearing from a woman who is she has retired teachers, and they can kind of speak to the more lower end of the scale more specifically. But there are a number of units that are available at Wake Robin, let's say roughly around maybe a quarter of them, that are in the under somewhere in the $200,000 range, depending on what size you would want. And of course, they go up from there.
That's your buy-in.
That's your buy-in, and then there's a monthly fee on top of that, which I don't know what the average necessarily would be, but again, it's kind of calibrated to the size of the dwelling. So let's say, in the $2,500 to $3,500 range, and some of this would depend on, is it a couple, is it a one person?
It's as low as 35.
Yeah, I think that it can be. I mean, that is, and again, I may ask to
Yeah, because that sounds fairly low, just knowing what the fee was 10 years, more than 10 years ago. More than 15 years, quite a while ago.
Yeah.
When I was marketing we were looking at, for medium size, a $200 buy-in, no nursing home attached, plus a monthly fee of $1,000 to $2,000. So if you're getting a nursing home attached now for $3,500, that seems extremely reasonable.
Yeah, I can certainly get
that would be
comprehensive fees that to the committee. I'm very happy to do that. I'm sure I can get that. Let's see. I just wanted to note that there was a joint housing committee recently that where it was testified that by Champlain Housing Trust that there are over 1,300 seniors on their waiting list, which is a 2 to 5 year long for affordable housing. This is for Cathedral Square. So I think that I'm just trying to make a case that CCRCs could be part of the solution for some middle income earners. At Wake Robin, about 25 units a year turn over, and these are typically 2 or 4 bedroom houses that are sold. And so to reference the number of with the Champlain Housing Trust, there are 25% apparently on their waiting list live in their own homes. So with the challenges of building housing, that's potentially over, in the low 300s of people who are sort of, stuck in the pipeline, basically, of housing. So it's, we have 40,000 units we need to build. It's a small drop in the bucket, but every drop, I think, counts. But one of the things that I wanted to describe is that there are currently about 1,900 of these establishments in this country, and they're increasingly being located in walkable downtown settings. And so it seemed like, to me, a potentially wonderful fit with Vermont, with our interest in encouraging housing in our historic walkable centers, in revitalizing these centers, which I serve on transportation, which we are serving with transit, public transit, and at the same time creating wonderful jobs that would help revitalize and attract newcomers to these locations. Let's see, and CCRCs also help Vermonters stay healthier longer. And so that's another reason that it seems like it might be worth our consideration of extending the benefits to more Vermonters for that reason. This reduces hospital stays and the costs of providing care to seniors. And some of that is through providing a supportive setting to convalesce from surgery, which gets them out of the hospitals sooner.
My mother was in the same kind. She spent 3 weeks after surgery in the nursing home section and then went back to her apartment. So I know how it works. So it is good.
And then another thing that is concerning for our state is that pay-as-you-go assisted living or paying out of pocket for home health care if you decide to try and age in place can be an unpredictable
But
way to
what
go.
happens if you live longer than expected? Or the stock market crashes, you run out of money. Does Wake Robin keep you there if you cannot pay the fees, or are you transferred elsewhere?
Yes, Wake Robin does allow somebody to stay even if their funds are exhausted.
Even in the apartment, the independent living sections?
That is my understanding, and I could
That would be good to know.
verify that for you. I think they're taking an actuarial bet on
Yeah, I know that people outliving their resources is becoming a problem because you don't want to throw a 90-year-old out that's lived there for 20 years, but there's no money left. So, and if you don't take Medicaid, yeah, there could be a problem. Okay.
Right, yes, so I will get that information.
I would assume
that prior to being admitted, they would take a financial statement and do an analysis of the individual's net worth in order to make that decision. So it's not that they're taking a major risk on that happening, presumably because they've done, correct me if I'm wrong, they would have done an analysis of the individual's financial capability and likelihood of being able to meet the commitment indefinitely.
Yes, that's my understanding. And my mother was in a similar institution in outside of Washington, D.C., and that was exactly the routine that we went through, as well as substantial medical testing to, just sort of suss out what might be headed their way. So, it's yes. Okay. So I just wanted to suggest that maybe it's worth reconsidering CCRCs in our state, because I think that it's potentially a model that would link a lot of planning, public health, and environmental goals, including encouraging housing density in our downtowns, which avoids development on working and forested lands. And provides workforce development opportunities and co-locates jobs and these institutions in a setting that could also provide things like daycare and access to many daily needs for not just the residents, but for the who are unlikely to need daycare, but for the workers there. And I did provide the benefits and salary statement that I was provided by Wake Robin separately.
They're here.
So I just wanted to suggest to the committee that that the benefits that CCRCs provide could outweigh the revenue that keeping the tax deduction or eliminating that deduction in place provides. This is a very macro argument that I'm making.
I think, because when we originally, 2018, did the rewrite of the tax code, somehow didn't have any medical deduction. We did a standard deduction and that was it. And the charities were in here 6D because they were afraid it was going to impact it. And nobody said anything about medical. And then that came up. So we did a very limited medical deduction. We don't do many independent deductions. And that was only over and above your independent, and it was a formula. But my memory is that and again, Wake Robin is the only one, the places that provided actual medical care on site, which is a nursing home, but you pay in your fee, but if you never use it, you don't get it rebated. So it is really an it's like long-term care insurance. You pay in, and if you need it, it's there. Maybe probably better than some long-term care insurance. And I thought we had allowed the same deduction that we would allow for long-term care insurance. Okay, I'm getting staff saying yes. I think that's what we did, because that was as close as we could come to what that fee is. Because you're not paying, everybody else is paying the fee for service. I go to the doctor, I get a bill, I get to deduct what I pay out of that bill. But you're paying in. Do you know what percentage of the folks? I mean, my mother was in her apartment for 80. almost 15 years. And she spent, I would say, a week or so in the nursing home section. Other than that, she was in an independent apartment until 3 weeks before she died. She was in a hospital for that amount of time. So I doubt that she used up anywhere near the amount of money that she had paid in. And, you know, you get a rebate, you buy your house, and then, I don't know what Wake Robin does, but most of them, you get your initial investment back minus cleaning charges or something, but you get your initial or your state gets your initial investment back. But not a rebate if you don't use the medical facility.
Correct. I think there are different models of CCRCs. My mother was in one and had the reverse experience of your mother. She sure did. They made a terrible actuarial bet on her. She was actually only for about 18 months in her independent living apartment where she had a catastrophic fall, and then things started to go downhill, but very slowly and incrementally. And she needed to, she was in assisted living for a long time, and then for an even longer time in the nursing section. So she was probably, not what they are, the outcome that they're looking for. But this is all on average, right?
No, it's
So
an insurance product.
It's-
It's a pool, and they're setting the rate
Yes.
based on the experience of how many people, how many days get used on average, and that's what's figured into the rate. And I would assume as people are living longer, that they're doing some adjustments. Their auditor is to their
make
rates.
things pencil out, yes, yeah. Yes, just, two extreme experiences with this kind of a model.
Which is what insurance does.
Exactly.
Yeah, it balances it out. Okay. We have considered this before, but we'll look at it again. I know we've tried to find an equitable. There are a lot of people that are paying into nursing homes, and we limit what they can deduct on. You can still deduct it federally, which is the big one. You're not getting a much smaller state deduction. So, okay, I guess you can deduct it if you choose to itemize, right? Okay, I'm not a tax. Okay, any questions for Kate? Thank you.
Yeah, there is a,
I saw Mary Ann, and I've got Ted is on next, but is it all right with you if we
Definitely.
have Mary Ann? Because then we'll have, and Senator Chittenden has arrived and is here.
Hello, my apologies.
Okay, no. So Mary Ann Chafee, are you there? Yes. Okay, if you unmute, there you go. Okay, you should be all.
Thank you. Yes, good afternoon and thank you very much. I'm Mary Ann Chaffee, a resident at Wake Robin in Shelburne, Vermont. My husband Bob and I specifically chose a continuing care residential community in light of his health problems in order to ensure access to skilled nursing, or the nursing home section as you're referring to it, as well as the traditional levels of independent assisted living and memory care. Wake Robin, as you know, is the only CCRC in the state, and other facilities do not have all four of these possibilities. We are both native Vermonters. I grew up in Barrie, where my father served as captain of the police force, and Bob in St. Albans, where his father was a mail carrier. Both of us paid our own way through the University of Vermont and met in our chosen profession, teaching. We each taught 38 years, all but 3 of those 76 years were in the state of Vermont. Bob retired in 1992 after 29 years teaching math at South Burlington High School, and I in 2005 after 35 years teaching Latin at Essex High School. We entered Wake Robin on November 7th, 2018 at ages 80 and 89, respectively. It came as a very rude awakening to discover that the state of Vermont had no longer permitted us to claim the medical deductions allowed by the federal. Be apprised that we are not alone in our struggle to understand why members of the Wake Robin community are the only residents of the state of Vermont not permitted to use the medical deductions allowed by the federal government. Our friends and neighbors often share their financial concerns, especially in light of the inflation-related 6.5% increase levied by the corporation on all residents. And I really want to emphasize the fact that many of our, as I just stated, though, many of our friends and neighbors really worry seriously about running out of money and cannot understand why they cannot claim their medical deduction for the state of Vermont when we can do it at the federal. So we sincerely request that the medical deduction be reinstated to conform with the federal deduction and remain more than grateful for your attention to this matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think you probably heard me explain, we don't do the new code in Vermont, we do very limited deductions, and everybody else gets to deduct the money they actually spend. What you have is more like an insurance policy. You are paying in, but you may never go to the nursing home, or many of your friends and neighbors may never get to use that. So but you don't get the money back if you don't use it. So it's an insurance policy, and what we've done so far is allow you to deduct that the same way I can deduct expenses for my long-term care insurance. When and we talked to Wake Robin about when you actually used it, generating a bill, and that would be deductible. But it's not actually a medical expense until you use it. So it's really an insurance product.
Could I just respond that every year we receive from the treasurer the amount that was spent on medical.
Right.
The portion that was spent for medical. So we do have that figure, and that's the figure, of course.
Right, and if Wake Robin, and we've talked with their accountants, if we could figure out a way to assess that. I mean, we're open to trying to do something, but.
It's already been assessed and we've already paid it.
Right, and I'm being assessed for my long-term care.
It's real, I can assure you it's real.
And if everybody else that has long-term care insurance doesn't use it, they don't get any deduction either, just that's allowed for insurance. And I am, anyone that's paying into long-term cares, insurance is paying what you are. You're paying for the assurance that you will have care when you need it, but you're not actually paying for the care.
No.
We tried, and if we can find a way to work your system, and you were the only one in the state that has it, so that we can find an equitable way to do that, we're open to it. But We haven't found a way yet.
Well, that's good to know, and I think that I can maybe help with that.
Okay,
Madam Chair, I'm Hugh Williams.
Yeah.
May I speak just for a minute?
yes, you can just, I think you could just introduce yourself for the record formally.
Introduce yourself.
I think you already told. us.
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah.
I was involved with the whole group, Wake Robin and others, to get the bill involved last year or in 2019. I met a number of you.
Yeah.
And a couple of things came up in the earlier comments. One is there's no increase in fees from going to independent living to any level of medical. It's the
Right.
same fee once you start, other than inflation adjustments. And I think that's important. Wake Robin does provide, if you lose all your money, they will continue to cover you. They don't throw you out.
Okay,
I'm not sure all this got through in the earlier conversation. It has been accepted, and gone through a lot of regulations and whatnot at the federal level, and they accept this. It's not the total fee, it's the portion that they calculate each year, and it's different each year, that is attributable to medical expense. And, the other types of nursing homes and whatnot are completely different, but they've been allowed at the federal level. And I think we ought to just take the straightforward way that they've accepted that that's a reasonable way to do this. And that's my opinion, but I'll let you go on. I'm sorry to interrupt.
no problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's, we're always open. I don't know that we can solve the problem, but we are aware of it and we've tried to solve it several times. And we'll keep trying to do that. Senator Chittenden asked to have you put on the agenda, and we have a House bill that did make it through the House, but we can keep working on it.
I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, committee? All right. So Ted,
Yes.
you're up. And this is, and I believe that is a request that if we could find anything, this would be a good place to put it. Okay. So, it might help just to move. You've got a fiscal note on this, or?
So for the record, Ted Barnett, Joint Fiscal Office, I have a little bit about how this piece fits within the medical expense deduction
Okay,
and then a preliminary estimate. So I could present both of those to the committee.
okay,
A few PowerPoint slides to go
okay.
through on this, and they're up on the screen. Great.
Okay,
So this history has already been referenced and talked about in this agenda item, but just wanted to reiterate that with Act 140 of 2002, Vermont's taxable income started with federal taxable income, which subtracts deductions from gross income. So what this meant is that the federal medical expenses deduction reduced Vermont taxable income. And so those deductions were kind of implicit in your Vermont tax. They were already kind of woven through. Act 73 of 2017 shifted the starting point to federal AGI, which effectively eliminated the medical expense deduction in Vermont. From what I understand, that started a lot of attention to reinstate the medical expense deduction, and that happened with Act 71 of 2019. Which created a new deduction for medical expenses within the Vermont personal income tax.
still
And
get the federal
yes,
deduction. It
Yes.
just doesn't flow through Vermont because we take our taxable income at up higher on the federal tax. Okay.
Right, and so this,
It also saved us from losing a whole lot of money with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act.
that was part of the equation.
Yes.
And so the Vermont, with the Vermont medical expenses deduction, you can take the federal itemized medical expense deduction minus your Vermont standard deduction and personal exemptions. And then also you're subtracting the amount that are deducted for entrance fees and monthly payments to a CCRC, which exceeds the limits for premiums pay on qualified long-term insurance contracts. And so that differential is the part we're really talking about here in Act 160, or sorry, in House Bill 166.
So they have to come up with, they have a number in that fee that they're setting aside.
Right, and so,
Come
sorry.
up with a number, the average, I guess, median or something, for insurance policies. There's a range of insurance policies, but I assume we just do the ones that cover nursing home care, because I don't think Wake Robin covers if they go to the hospital.
That I do not know.
Yeah, that was my impression. So so you have to, they can essentially deduct what people not living in Wake Robin are paying for their long-term care insurance, because this is essentially, you haven't paid out anything yet, and you may never use any of it. You may use very little of it, or you may use a whole lot more than you paid in. That's how the insurance balances it out.
Yes. And I know, yes, the committee back in 2019, based on conversations with Graham Campbell, really viewed a portion of this as long-term care insurance. And so H166 would remove the language that limits the deduction for entrance fees or monthly payments made to a continuing care community. And so I'm going to skip this table and go to the example, which I think really highlights the information that was on the table. So this I pulled from the Vermont Department of Taxes website very helpfully. It gives an example of a medical expense deduction for a married couple who have a certain portion of medical expenses that were an entrance fee or a monthly payment made to a continuing care retirement community. So the federal deductible medical expenses in this example is $50,000. As I mentioned before, you subtract your exemptions and standard deductions from this figure. So those are the next two lines that get subtracted. And then this next piece.
So can I jump in for clarity?
Sure.
So that 50, that's the bill for a medical expense that actually had and paid?
This is overall medical expenses. So it could be everything from doctor's bills, medical care, and then there's a $20,000 entrance fee and medical or monthly fee piece here. So 30,000.
Well, at least in the one I marketed, you get your main meal of the day, you get like housekeeping. There's usually some kind of a transportation system that will drive you places. Wake Robin starts with, you can buy a freestanding house, and then you can move into apartments, into assisted living, and then into a nursing home. Most of the ones that have gone up start with apartments and go to assisted living. And then you get, if you need a nursing home, they'll help you transfer to one.
I have to ask, her meals to Wake Robin residents pay rooms and meals taxes?
I believe they do not, and I think you know that, Senator.
Well, keep hearing about the changes that have been made in order to find this.
No, we are not charging the rooms and meals tax. Okay.
And so the next piece is there is a limit at the Vermont level, based on your age of how much of long-term care insurance you're allowed to deduct. In this case, for the couple, which is, age 65 and 66, they're allowed to deduct $4,510 each.
That's a month, a year.
A year, yes. And so that limit needs to be deducted from their $20,000 of insurance fees in monthly.
$500 a year.
That is the federal amount that they limit for long-term care insurance for 60-year-olds.
That
Yes.
sounds pretty low to me.
It is pretty low,
That's what I thought.
but that's what it is.
Yeah, I know, and I've been writing the checks for long-term care insurance, and I haven't written one for $4,500.
Yes, and the limits are far lower if you're age 41 to 50, 40 or under. So yes.
It's not an incentive to buy it, and that's what we really need you to buy it.
Right, and so since the deduction subtracts the amount of overage over that federal limit, you subtract another $10,980. And so in this example, the Vermont medical expense or deduction is $15,720. So that's kind of how it could work with a portion of medical expenses, a portion of entrance and monthly fees, as it currently is in law.
So if somebody at Wake Robin had all those numbers, they would be able to deduct $15,000.
If the medical expenses were kind of outside of those entrance and monthly fees.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not too bad. Okay. But before, they would have been able to claim the entire, it would help if we knew what the breakdown was and what they were actually paying in monthly fees is, because I think 3,500 is a little low.
Sure, so I, on this slide, have a little, this is information provided on the Wake Robin website.
Okay.
And so the entrance fee range has a pretty wide range. It's anywhere from $210,210 to over $800,000, depending on the floor plan and occupancy and those types of things.
Let's start with an independent house, because you can have a freestanding home there.
Yes,
Okay, so you start when you're living in your freestanding house, and that's probably one of the ones that's at the 8th. That's the entrance fee, okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a nice house.
Of that number, that is the entrance fee, do you have a number as to what portion is considered prepayment for long-term care?
I do not, unfortunately.
Okay,
Yes.
And it does, and when a person, so there's nothing that takes them into long-term care that changes the amount of money that they pay per month? Or is this considered long-term care from the date that they arrive?
This is considered the kind of a prepayment regardless of what your trajectory is.
But in any case, from a federal standpoint, the long-term care number, doesn't matter what they pay. The federal limit for tax deduction purposes is the chart that you show that goes up to, I think, 5,600 when you're over 70 something.
Yes, so that would be the limit for long-term care insurance. However, at the federal level, kind of the part of the particularly monthly fees can cover some things that might be considered medical care. And the federal government, for what I understand, allows roughly 1/3 of entrance fees and monthly payments to be
you're
considered.
getting some medical care, or at least assistance with the ADLs in the assisted living. There's usually a nurse on staff. You can stay there and have somebody check on you when you have the flu, but and then there's definitely a nursing level staff, nursing home also on premises. Okay, so 12, 20. Okay,
Yes, and then the next bullet outlines the monthly fee range. So it's anywhere from $3,790 to $12,230. Again, it depends on the property you're at, occupancy, et cetera. And one thing I wanted to note here is kind of where the trickiness arises in a lot of the discussion we're having is these continuing care communities are regulated in BSA Title 8, which is the same as it's the title that contains the banking and insurance industry. And I called DFR today to get a little more information on this, and I talked about community, and they're, yes, so it's, yes, so that is the place it's in. And so just to reiterate, H166 would allow the same deduction that is available at the federal level, where I would probably, I'm not an accountant, but approximately 1/3 of the entrance fees and monthly expenses may be tax deductible. That's per the Wake Robin website. And so this would likely result in large reductions of taxable income for members of CCRCs.
The question is, when would the deduction be incurred? For example, if a person is paying an entrance fee, would that be deductible? That portion that would be allocated to medical care would be deductible over an indeterminate period of time, or would be deductible when paid?
I would prefer, I will look into this. It's my understanding, so the entrance fee is amortized over 5 years. And so my understanding is when you pay those fees, you would be able to deduct those, but
Yeah,
Let me
I'd like to
confirm on that.
I'm interested particularly in how the IRS deals with that.
That would, because the entrance fee is actually, we used to explain it, you were purchasing the lease, you owned the lease on your apartment or your house. And if they're up to 800,000, as opposed to 2, they seem to stage it out, but that's the purchase of the lease, not any of the services. The services are
Okay,
covered
what's paid for on the monthly
under
charge.
the monthly fee.
But I think you've indicated that at some point, part of the entrance fee and monthly expenses. So that's why I'm interested in the in the entrance fee, as to how that's dealt with for tax purposes at the federal level.
I don't,
I mean, I understand the ongoing payments on a monthly basis.
yes, it's mortgage interest, I don't know. This is why
this is where I would like to consult a tax professional and get more clarity on that.
Back.
yeah,
Yeah,
this is why we went with, this is an insurance product and we taxed it. A lot of
That's easy to
deductions that you
understand.
would with an insurance product. It's regulated by the insurance department, not by the health department or, anything else. And yeah, it's unique. I think the cost, I know there was discussion with the one I marketed about doing it, but the cost of providing that full life cycle gets to be prohibitive. And if you want to keep your rates within the range of, if not your average Vermonter, at least your middle income Vermonters. And so we haven't seen any more.
Kirk Cummings, may I ask a question?
Yes, Senator Chittenden.
I want to say right off the bat, I really appreciate you finding time for this important topic. So thank you. And I know we have a really full agenda, and I just think this is well worth our attention. We have an aging state, and this is the type of high density housing we want to see in Vermont. So I think this is a rightful discussion to address a lot of our housing concerns and questions. Thank you, Ted, too, for pulling this slide together. And I really appreciate that. You had the estimate from 2019 with a rough estimate of 250,000. You think it might be 500,000 per year. That's for removing the entire limit. My question to you, Ted, I'm looking at slide 4, which has the current limits on long-term premiums in Vermont. If I'm reading this correctly, how long have they been at this level? And is there an intermediate ground where maybe we would adjust these for the rate of inflation, or possibly just recalibrate to some of our neighbors and possibly doubling these? Has any analysis been done at looking to just adjust these current limits, or have they been gradually adjusting over time since we put this, since this limit's been in effect?
Okay.
sure. To answer your question, yes, the analysis was only done at kind of removing the limit to these amounts that are listed on table 4. We would have to do more analysis and I would be interested to do that analysis if there were kind of changes to the table or the amounts, but
But I guess the question is, if we just let it all be deductible, how much revenue would we lose?
that is the estimate here on slide 8. It's the $500,000 per year. Yes, and this is a preliminary estimate. We would spend a little more time in some of our income tax modeling to, I think if the bill is moving forward in this way, to, before writing a fiscal note, to really make sure that that number is in the right ballpark, but this is our preliminary number.
And then you get to, if they can deduct everything, why can't people that are deduct their full cost of their long-term care insurance? Especially the gentleman from New York that called me almost daily because they were getting a 300% increase. 100% increase is not rare. I think we heard that when we did the insurance housekeeping bill, that if there's a fragile part of the insurance industry, it's long-term care. And maybe I could deduct, could buy more, so, and that's the other issue for people that are really struggling to pay for the insurance. We're gonna have to wrap this up because I'm losing Emily Carr at 3. So I'm gonna do Emily next, and then we'll do Julia, who's going to tell us issues with what will happen if we change the cap on housing. So this is our day for bad news, I think. But we'll see. We have. Just
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
stepping in Senator Slotkin's shoes. He made sure we got it. Yeah. Okay, we're going on to an act relating to commissioning Department of Corrections personnel as notary public. All right. Oh, that's why Jake's here. Okay, I guess the question that came up is, why can't they just do what everybody else does and get their stamp?
Well, first of all, my name is Emily Carr. For the record, I'm the General Counsel for Vermont Department of Corrections. Thank you for having me. It's not whether or not why correction personnel can't do what everybody else is doing. We were an oversight when this bill was drafted.
Okay.
And if you look at the language, and of course I forgot my glasses, they
It's been one of those days.
do you mind? Thank you.
We're a full service committee.
In 5305, section 1 of the bill, and if you go down to section 2, employees defined, subsection B, it says law enforcement related, persons employed as law enforcement officers under Title 20 who are non-certified constables or who are employed by law enforcement agency. And then this was the language when the bill was originally passed. Department of Public Safety, Fish and Wildlife, Motor Vehicles, Liquor and Lottery, Children and Families, Office of the Defender General, Office of the Attorney General, State's Attorneys or Sheriff, and the Department of Corrections was not included.
Sorry, I'm blind. So I think one of those ones might be.
It's okay, I really appreciate it.
Okay, I should have mentioned that.
So we believe that it was an oversight. This wasn't brought to our attention until about November, when notices went out about the new requirements, for new training requirements. And when I first saw the language, I just assumed either we were forgotten about or people may consider us law enforcement agency, which sometimes that's a misconception.
Yeah.
So we just like we said, we thought it was an oversight, given the fact that the rest of our criminal justice partners are exempt from the requirement. Also, the Department of Corrections requires a lot of training, and we've already seen, I don't have all the data, but we've seen a drop in the numbers of people within the department who reinstated their notary license because of this new requirement. They see that they have to do another training, they're like, whatever, I don't need the license. But it's imperative that we have notaries in all our field offices and in our correctional facilities.
That's what the residents have a law library, and I assume a lot of the papers they might generate need a notary.
Exactly. We have detainees, some of them are pro se representing themselves. For those who have already been sentenced, we have the Rule 74 appeal process now, and furlough is revoked. So there's a lot of court documents that could get generated when they're incarcerated. Individuals that might be going through TPR hearings, losing their parental rights. And so having caseworkers within the facility to be able to notarize certain documents, and also within the PMP offices, as we are the entity responsible for supervising those on probation. So if they violate, we have to submit affidavits to either the law enforcement agency or the prosecutor, the state's attorney. So we need notaries for those purposes as well.
Okay. Okay, so he or she cleaned up, he or she the person. Yeah.
It would be right before that section, Senator.
Yeah, I've got exemptions, judiciary, employees, law enforcement. Okay, we just adding off corrections.
Yes.
Correct. The Department of Corrections, when they're acting in their job. The Career Lottery can do it, motor vehicles, fish and wildlife, you did get left out. Okay, committee, questions, comments?
Have we made an inquiry as to whether this was by design?
No.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why it's here and not in Gov.
It was.
It was in GovOps?
It was, and it's my understanding it passed through, and they had Ms. Hibbert from the Secretary of State's office testifying there were no objections.
I mean, if we exempt them, I'm sure it's here because there's a fee involved. And so if we exempt all those multitudes, the Department of Corrections, we might lose a couple $100 in fees, which we didn't collect until 2 years ago, or are we just starting to collect?
I'm not sure if it's just, I'm not sure when it started to be collected, but I know that.
There was training, and I thought maybe
The fee as well.
fee as well, but if we exempt people, that we won't be collecting a fee from them. Which is, I'm sure, why it's here, but we could call the secretary down. This is a GovOps issue, they're fine. And if we have no questions and no comments,
Just wondering if you might want to consider voting to fill out without recommendation. Without recommendation.
oh. I don't know that we can do that because there's fees.
Yeah.
I can shine some light on this.
Okay, good.
Okay. So Director, Joint Fiscal Office for the record. So I didn't work on you're talking about H-178, correct? Yeah, so I didn't work on this. Emily Byrne, who's now on maternity leave, had looked into this initially, and she did reach out and confirm that the fiscal impact of this would be de minimis. So I think that that's why there's no fiscal note. And I can't speak to it in any more detail because I haven't done it myself, but that was the conclusion that, that she reached on the House side.
I mean, if they're not getting them anyway, because they don't want to have to go through training, they got enough to do.
Well, I think this issue of them being forgotten because inadvertently in the past, I think is quite likely. You know, the intent when we allowed law enforcement officers and so on to do notarization and not to require fees and the formal registration process was because they were performing a service in connection with their official duties. And that's what I see happening here. So I see no reason not to, particularly where there's no fiscal impact. I would be in favor of doing just that.
Is that a motion?
Yes.
Okay. Senator Brock, we need a paper. Sir Clerk. Yeah, no, wait, we've got a motion. Now we have discussion. We have a motion to approve H-178 as presented.
Part of the discussion was whether or not to have recommendation. And the only thing that would prohibit us from voting to fill out this recommendation would be that we had already amended. So if we don't amend the bill, we are free of parliamentary wise, rules wise, we vote that recommendation. That's,
Okay,
that
well,
comment is silent to
okay.
Senator Brock's motion.
And the motion is to approve Senator Bray.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, I didn't make a motion, I just asked whether we would want to consider.
So I have a motion to approve as presented. Is there further discussion?
I thought Senator Brock moved to include the right to become a notary without.
That's what the
That's what he
bill
wants
says.
to approve of.
Yes, we're adding,
What the
there's a
bill says.
list of exemptions. The bill as it came to us for
Okay.
GovOps adds employees of the Department of Corrections acting in their official capacity.
Now, I guess ultimately by our approving it, what we're effectively saying is there's a de minimis fiscal impact and the Committee on Finance recommends passage.
Yeah.
That's what we're saying. Effectively.
I'm sorry, I thought this language came, which is has a bill number on it, that was being considered as language to be amended
No,
onto another bill.
no,
Okay.
No,
this is a freestanding bill. I think we were being asked to amend the Wake Robin language on to miscellaneous
Okay.
tax.
Simple thing is make Wake Robin residents at the same time.
Same time.
Consistent.
Very efficient.
Okay. Is there further discussion on the motion to approve as presented, which adds the Department of Corrections employees to all the other state employees we exempted from having to take specialized training? And this is as in their official capacity. They cannot notarize anybody's voter list or anything else. Okay. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. I have that. There's 5 of us here, 601. Anybody want to report this one? Senator McCormick, you want to report it? Okay. Senator McCormick will report. Thank you.
Thank you
We
very
got you out
much.
of here in time.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Y'all have a good weekend.
You too. Looks like it's nice out there. But I don't know about here, but in Maine, it's supposed to be 50 and rain again this weekend, which is why I didn't go last weekend. Julia, come on up. And this is what I thought Jake was here to ride.
He was, but he had to run to pick up his kid.
Oh, that childcare thing again. Baby's childcare. Who says we aren't grounded in the real world? Okay, but we were talking about the other day about the impact of the many cases doubling of house values on the taxes. People paying under the incomes, paying according to their income, under income sensitivity. Because we limit the value of your home, which is covered which can be sensitized and above. So if you, at $90,000, you only get a $250,000 home, there's a pretty good chance that house, depending on its community, could now be worth 400,000 or 450, because that's outside all the exemptions. But we're not sure what impact that will have on a bill, and no one can tell us. But Julia's going to tell us the impact it'll have on the income financial statement of the ed fund if we play around with things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great, thank you. For the record, I'm Director of the Joint Fiscal Office. Madam Chair, do you want me? I have some slides prepared. Would you like me to share my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So, as the chair mentioned, this is in follow-up to committee discussion. I was not here for the committee discussion last week, but I did try to catch up on it on YouTube. And so really, what I have presented or ready to present for you today are considerations of changing provisions of the property tax credit. So there was a conversation about as the chair mentioned, adjusting that house site cap value. So before talking about the considerations, I thought it'd be helpful just to review the property tax credit and then touch on some of the considerations that were raised by the Summer Study Committee. Madam Chair was a co-chair of that Summer Study Committee into the income-based education tax. They actually looked at adjustments to the property tax credit and ultimately determined to make no recommendation to changing the property tax credit. And then there's a couple other just additional considerations just worth keeping in mind. It's not meant to be an exhaustive list, but just some things to think about in this big policy discussion.
What was the date of the report? That
Last,
made no recommendation?
December.
I think December, I don't know the specific date. It was December of 2022, and it's posted on the.
It was last winter.
And
It's
the
posted on-
changes in appraisal were made 21 days ago, right?
Yeah, so there's the committee itself was not looking at the common level of appraisal or the equalization study. It was looking at big picture. If there were to be changes made to the property tax credit, regardless of the CLA, what would the impact of those changes be on taxpayers across the state?
And the first thing we looked at was, what if you just raise the income sensitivity level, houses and income, took it up to, I don't know, you do 250, 300, but put everybody but rich Vermonters under income sensitivity. We were looking for gradual slope. We didn't.
As if there were no radical changes would take place. The system.
Well,
as
the
it
radical
was.
changes were taking place last November. They've continued, but I think what I've gotten when we had Jake in here, property valuation, is that the values are continuing, but how and when they get reflected on the grand list or on your actual tax bill isn't immediate.
And I think that if I may, I think that Senator, you raise a really important point when thinking about the context of this presentation, and what I've prepared to talk about today is that, as I know you're well aware, there's many factors that are impacting the property tax bill, right? And the CLA is certainly an important one of them. And when thinking about the property tax credit and thinking about the education fund of being a self-balancing system, any changes that are happening within the education fund are going to come up elsewhere. And so that's something that I'm really, I have some examples we can dive into.
I'm looking forward to all those charts.
So I didn't include, because I saw that there was only half an hour, I didn't include any of the modeling. I can certainly talk about it, but I pulled out the bigger picture
We
revelations.
The red colors off because some members thought they were pejorative.
Yes, so this is really just big picture, you know, what did the committee explore and what did the committee determine? So reviewing a property tax credit, just so we can base ourselves in the conversation. So you know, the homestead property tax has a credit that is based on income. In FY 23, 64% of homesteads received a property tax credit. And that was a total tax expenditure of 164 million.
54%.
64.
Thank you. 64.
64%.
Not 80, but
No,
64.
Not 80, 64%.
So what are they on track now for being in the taxes to be paid in this coming fall, this year?
I don't have that data yet because the tax department is still working on cleaning up those collections.
So while the committees are meeting and evaluating, making recommendations, the 80% is now down to 64?
Yes, it's been,
And it does not include the changes to come in the coming
Right.
weeks for the April 1st appraisal of 21 days ago.
yeah, so this 64% refers to FY 23. So this year,
The taxes,
and then you'll recall, I know that you're aware that the property tax credit is on a lag because
Yes.
of the data. So I don't,
but I think it's
The
fair to
estimate-
say housing values have doubled,
yes,
but that incomes have also continued to rise, and incomes are rising fairly quickly. So if 20 years ago, we thought $90,000 was a moderate income, that might be something to relook. What we can't do, I believe, is change anything for this year. We would have to change things for next year's December 1st letter, right?
Yes.
yeah, so
We can't help this year's tax bill.
If we don't change it for December 1st next year,
Right.
then this time, 12 months from now, we'll be saying we can't change anything.
Well, but we can right now make changes and have the starting date be the next tax year,
Okay,
okay?
yeah,
All right, we missed it last year. We were focused on going to an income-based tax.
we haven't fully seen the train come through the tracks.
We were coming out of COVID, which is
Yeah.
taking us a while. We actually weren't back here until halfway through last year, so we are now back and live. Okay, so back to what we learned.
yeah, so I'm still just trying to touch on reviewing the property tax credit, so we're all talking the same language. And I know that the committee is aware of this, so I won't go into too deep, but, you know, the property tax credit is based on both the household income and the house site value. So the conversation the committee had last week was talking about adjusting those house site values. And then there's a table here overviewing the property tax credit. So household income, that's referring to the total, essentially, the total income of folks living within that home. So then if it's less than or equal to 47,000, then the property tax credit may be used on the first 400,000 of the house site value. And there's also additional tax relief based on household income that's available. And I'm not really going to touch on that because that's another whole world within
That
the
has
property
been
tax
there
credit.
forever. It was the safety net well over 30 years ago. I think it went up from 35 to 47,000, but that's your local taxes. That was there under the foundation formula. It's really there to keep people from.
More foundation,
Yeah, it probably was.
couple decades.
I don't remember that long ago, Senator.
And so then if the household income is below 90,000, then the property tax credit may be used on the first 400,000 of house site value. And if it's above 90,000, maybe use them first 225 of house site value. You'll recall that the way that that property tax credit is calculated is essentially just looking at, okay, what is that?
47 to 90, so you can have a very low income and up to a $400,000 house. But if you're 90 to 138, it's only, you get to deduct less of your house value.
Right, so the way that it's calculated is it's okay, how much does the household pay on property? And then how much does the household pay on income plus whatever they're paying above that house site cap? And then the difference between the two is how much is the property tax credit? And that is sort of determining, the term that's often used is paying on income, is deducting that property tax credit so that essentially that household is paying in property taxes the amount that they would be paying if they were to pay on income. So that's just a review of how the property tax credit works, big picture. And now sort of diving into a couple of the major lessons or conclusions that the study committee reached over the course of the summer and the fall. So as we mentioned, the Income-Based Education Tax Study Committee examined changing the property tax credit, looked at a lot of modeling, some big modeling lifts. And ultimately, the committee's report stated that solving one issue, and this is talking about issues that they identified within the property tax credit. The report identified solving one issue creates new issues elsewhere in the distribution of tax paid as a percentage of income, and it is difficult to achieve the desired effects in a targeted way.
Do they say what the desired effect is?
So the committee was talking about, they were looking at 4 problem areas that they called them in the, that they were trying to change in the property tax credit current system. And essentially what they were trying to do was smooth the progressivity of the percentage paid on income, percentage of property taxes that are a percentage of income. And they were trying to.
If I'm paying 7% of my income, if that's it, then why aren't the people making $1 million paying 7%? That's been, which in hard dollars is a lot more hard dollars.
And the committee was looking at the pillars of a good tax system that are often spoken about, and was really looking at fairness and simplicity.
So
We're
this is
running late if you hear.
the question I'm asking is, the system traditionally through the years has had 80% of the citizens they only pay based on their income, and 20% who don't. And when you establish the rates and you do not update them every year, the 80% falls into the 70s and into the 60s, and if no changes are made, into the 50s. And then our system would have been 50% pay on income and 50% pay on the value of their property. And were we to do nothing, it would be 40 and it would be 20, and it would be 10.
Okay.
So given that that's what happens when you do nothing, the committee's recommendation was not to recommend anything, is that what?
No, this was not
Yeah, but-
adjusting the property tax. This was switching to an income-based model, not a
this-
property-based model.
To clarify, this specific section that I pulled, and to be clear, this was the findings of the committee. I'm a nonpartisan
The messenger.
staff
remember the
on the
messenger?
committee. I just want to clarify that.
I would shoot us before I shoot the messenger.
I
So I just want to
But I do know,
clarify,
Madam
that's
Chair, I
my
don't discuss
position.
shooting people anymore.
No, that is a good thing, Senator, that you do not. We're even more sensitive now than we were then.
So with that huge caveat
Yes.
of being the messenger, this specific portion that I pulled from the committee's report was talking about their findings after specifically examining adjustments to the property tax credit. So what the committee did was first they looked at big picture, what are they thinking about doing? And then they said, before we consider moving to solely an income education tax, what if we adjusted the current system? What if we made adjustments to the property tax credit? So Graham Campbell, who used to be at JFO, and I worked a lot with the
And
committee.
who was in Kentucky when he was doing this.
Worked a lot with the committee to do a lot of the modeling with Deb Brighton to figure out and try to help the committee adjust the property tax credit to achieve their desired goals, which were really simplicity and fairness, and with fairness referring to progressivity. And after doing that whole exercise, the committee said, given the analysis and the committee's desire to simplify the property tax system, the committee decided not to recommend any adjustments to the property tax credit. So beyond that, I can't speak to the policy portion, but I can say that the committee, after looking at the modeling, decided to continue to explore an education income tax and did not continue to explore adjustments to the property
There
tax
were
credit.
individuals on the committee who were free, we said that, to submit proposals and bills, but the committee as a whole couldn't reach agreement that we just, the thought that we'll just put a 2% surcharge on and everybody will pay that, like a local income tax, just didn't work.
Understood, Marcia.
Yeah.
Understood. The committee is, should we wish to continue the current system, which the committee has recommended we do, pending future changes?
I don't know that we recommended it. We said we
The
couldn't
committee-
find any.
the study committee has said,
benefits.
we're not gonna move to an income tax, et cetera, and we don't, they recommended any changes.
So the committee's report, ultimately, the committee decided not to make a recommendation as to whether or not they should move to an income tax. They said the committee decided to focus, if they were to move to an income tax, how it would be structured. So they didn't cite a recommendation one way or another.
So the question, I'm sure, I would say, do we intend to do our best to go back to 80% being paid based on income under the current model? Or would we prefer to sit and do nothing, even though we know we're 80% down to 64, and when we come back next year, it will be undoubtedly below 64%.
We are exploring the issue to decide what we intend to do, if anything.
I think that's the issue.
I think that is the issue, but we are trying right now to just figure out what's going on out there. Senator Brock.
I'm lost in the discussion. When we say we, who is we?
Is this the Lone Ranger in Tonto?
Well, I'm saying, we're talking about the committee. I'm assuming that you're talking about the tax structure committee. Is that right or wrong?
No, this
No.
was,
So
What committee are we talking about?
I'm responding to, and I'm sorry if this is unclear. What I have on this slide and when I'm talking about the committee, I've been talking about the summer and fall study committee that was looking specifically at developing an education income tax.
but that came out of the recommendation from the tax
From the tax
structure.
structure
committee.
commission. And the tax structure commission is the one who came up with looking for an income base. But there was there weren't specifics in it, as I
No.
remember.
Correct.
Now, the numbers that went along, in terms of your 64%, and to do nothing at that point, there are two different dates that are important. One is the date, the tax structure commission's report. Do you know when that was offhand completed?
I don't, I think it was like maybe 2019, 2020, but that was before I was
That
here.
sounds right, and I remember because I'm the one who proposed the tax structure commission, something that I sincerely regret at this point, based on the output of it. But we put it in a conference committee, in one of the conference committees, in 2018, I believe. That's where it came from.
For the, I know if it went there or it went, I know it went on miscellaneous
No,
tax.
that's what we put in. I think it must have been the conference committee of miscellaneous tax. It was to continue the work of the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission, which was completed, 2011, 2012.
Isn't that early?
Yeah, it was. So we did that. And we only did two of the three taxes.
To do the second, yes, and this
And the
was to do
third
the
one was to
property
do
tax,
property
okay.
because it wasn't done originally. And the whole idea behind it was you had to look at all three taxes in order to figure out the best way to do taxes, because if you took them separately, it wouldn't work. And that proved to be true.
Mhm.
And we went back, this was done actually 2010 or 11, because we went back
Yes,
in 12 and Governor Shumlin wouldn't go along with doing
that's
one
right,
solely.
that's right, that was,
Yeah, and so
that-
as a result, we looked at the I think fair, sort of the consistency, how it worked, but we didn't look on, was it the right tax? And so the idea of the tax structure commission was to go back and create that third leg, recognizing the fact that since we fooled around with it for 5 years, the other two are now obsolete, which is where we are again, and now they're all obsolete. Because at the time that the tax structure commission report was done, we didn't have this big gap. At the time their report was done and they were looking at it, we were at about 90%.
Yeah.
When income sensitivity. Then it dropped, then it dropped.
80% of people were paid based on.
Yeah, and then when we did this report of this group that was done at this summer, past summer. At that point, it was when they did it, it was before 64% now, but what was it then when they looked at it?
It was between 64 and 70. It might have been 68%, somewhere in the
Somewhere.
65 to 70
Yeah.
ballpark.
And so now it is doubtless lower than that. I'll bet you. And it's because of and none of these committees, at least certainly the first one, the tax structure, never took into account the notion that there could be this kind of precipitous change.
no, I don't think anyone did, and we haven't seen inflation like this since the oil embargo in the
Yeah,
early
that's right,
70s.
73.
And so we've got that.
And
This
none of
is-
that, what we just discussed, I realize is happening, and none of that taken place. We would be at 64% of the people, we were at 64% of the people pay based on income.
Yes.
And since we're not inclined to want to find a way to change it for this fall's taxes, we are destined a year from now to have that 64% considerably lower without having done anything.
Unless we do something.
Now, let's do
Okay.
something.
Okay, so if we all can just focus, we can talk about doing something. Can we see that if we don't do anything, things are going to get worse?
Yeah.
Will we all see that point? Okay, good, then we don't have to discuss that. Let's just continue in your presentation, and then, have we heard from Ellen?
She can come in a little late.
Okay,
How long do you think that'll take this?
see if she's ready. How long is your presentation?
I think it depends on how much discussion the committee is interested in having.
Okay,
And I do think that one of the big picture things, and just to keep in mind here, is because the property tax credit is a function of both income and property value, having fewer people paying on income means that, in fact, they have less of a tax burden to pay on property than to pay on income. So it is a policy question, and by thinking about the two factors that go into play with the property tax credit and thinking about the shift of fewer people receiving a property tax credit, that means that they're not receiving a property tax credit because if they were to pay on income, they would be paying more than they're paying on property. So just something to keep in mind in terms of
We
the
do
structure of
have
the
a
system.
significant number, we found out, and we have a significant number of Vermonters who don't pay income tax because they're under the deductible level. And we have a significant number who pay on their income, on their property, even though they're eligible to be income sensitized because their property value is so low, and that works for them.
And I do have a couple of examples if we get there, that shows how this shakes out. So there were,
Senator McCormick and
Do we have, and if so, do we know how many people who have low incomes because they don't need them, because they're so rich? They own what they need already, they own the property outright, the company owns the car, the company owns the plane, and so on, but they're actually on paper low income.
I'm not sure that.
they occasionally
I don't know.
pop up with a rebate check sitting on their Mercedes. But there are people that are living on unearned income, the Trustafarian urban legend, that might be very happy living in a very modest home. Might be the family homestead, and they don't mind driving their 10-year-old pickup truck. They're probably the outliers, and nothing we do can, we are not gonna get anything.
Well, no, one bill.
Okay.
So.
And that one of the reasons that when we did these tax commission studies, and if I go back to the original findings of the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission study, which I think they did an excellent job. I mean, I agree with, I thought they did an excellent job. But one of the things that was pointed out in all of that was also the purpose of the latest tax commission study, is that an effective tax system balances various sources of revenue, recognizing that you shouldn't put in effect all your eggs in one basket. And that's why you didn't put everything in an income tax, which is a particularly volatile source of income, and you balance it between the three sources of tax. And I think as we go through this discussion, that's something we ought to keep in mind, keep in the forefront.
And we have put a substantial amount of sales tax into the ed fund, which is historically more volatile. If the bottom falls out and incomes drop, even if incomes don't drop, people are afraid and they're not going to spend. And we've been in a Christmas spending spree from all the COVID economic stimulus, and it is just starting to go away. And if we aren't feeling the pain in here, they are feeling the pain across the hall, because expectations are very high and the money isn't there. So, and we've got this unprecedented boom. We've got the 3-year rolling averages because historically in the real estate market has gone up and it has come down, sometimes faster than it went up. But it's reached an unsustainable level and will probably come down. And by next year, we may be moaning that incomes will probably not come back down because it's hard to take a pay raise.
So I think that Senator Brock, you raised another point that the study committee did look into and look at the different pillars of the tax system. And I could certainly come back and walk through that, but the point that you're raising of the balance within the reliability pillar is certainly an important one to keep in mind, and thinking about the shift to different types.
Madam Chair, the question I'm trying to bring forth is, I'm assuming there will be no shifts until there are shifts legislated by the legislature. And the chair has just accurately described that the ed fund has benefited from sales tax revenues and such, and we know how much money there is to fund our system. So the the question is, shall the amount of money in the ed fund, regardless of how robust or weak the economy might be a year from now, will that sum of money be directed at 80% of Vermonters for their property tax bills? Or will it be at this year's level of 64% of Vermonters? Or will next year it be 55% of Vermonters?
Okay.
Where does that money go? Because absent or doing any actions, regardless of whether the fund gets bigger or smaller, the number of people who benefit from it each year is shrinking.
Well,
So I think that you raise an excellent point, which is almost a perfect segue into the two conclusions.
Okay.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So the study committee really looked at two lessons, and Graham Campbell coined them, or the committee coined them, pushing on the balloon and the sledgehammer. I think these are really helpful illustrations, and they get exactly to your point, Senator McDonald. So the first lesson being, and this is after looking at modeling, but for the sake of time, I didn't think that to include it all, but essentially pushing on the balloon. So solving one issue or making one change in the property tax system.
raising the income level or raising the house value or both.
Yes, those create new issues elsewhere in the income and house site value distribution. So if you think about sort of pushing on a balloon, right? You squeeze it down over here, then it's gonna pop up somewhere else. If you squeeze it in the middle, it's gonna pop up on both sides. And so because the property tax credit is a tax expenditure, that means that increasing the eligibility and the size of the credit will also increase the cost of that tax expenditure. So when we see an increase in a tax expenditure, it needs to be paid for, right?
Unless we decide to raise
cost
Yes.
money.
So because the ed fund is self-balancing, that means that expanding the property tax credit or effectively reducing property tax burden of some individuals or many individuals will require increasing property tax rates or the property tax burden on other individuals. And that's the idea of pushing on that balloon.
Not necessarily. It is self-leveling.
It's self-leveling through property taxes. So because,
And through the ed fund, which is primarily sales taxes.
so the way that the property taxes are determined is on our, using the ed fund outlook as an example, the way that I model this is it's, okay, we've got the non-property revenue sources coming in, those sales tax, meals and rooms, all of that. And we're considering that fixed. Unless you change those rates, that's a
Raise
fixed,
the rooms and meals tax,
fixed
and
input.
sales tax.
You've got
That's it.
you've got the expenditures.
You're
So-
correct.
So then that gap between the amount that's raised in non-property and the amount that needs to flow out of the ed fund, that gap is filled with property taxes.
So
If that's the only thing you change, but you can change the $90,000
Right, and it's,
threshold.
yes.
And when you self-level it by pouring the money in, it's gonna be less money for more people.
the money that's coming, the self-balancing mechanism is through property taxes.
The property
That's
tax
the only
balance,
flexible
but
lever.
if everybody in this side of the table, we're gonna raise the same amount of money. Okay, and right now, we're all paying the same amount. But everybody in this side of the table is going to get a 10% decrease. Decrease. You're getting it. So we have now reduced the amount of money we're bringing in by 20%. Unless we reduce the middle of the table, you guys on the other side are going to pay 10% more apiece. It may balance out in your property tax, but if we lower, because we've already accounted for the sales tax, we can raise the sales tax. It wouldn't be easy to do, but we could raise it. But unless we find another tax to raise, for every time we reduce somebody's property tax, that their bill, whether they pay on income or they pay on their property because it's a single wide in a swamp and worth less.
But that group of people is getting smaller every year.
Yeah, so, but if we make it larger, all right, and we say, okay, this bigger group of people are going to pay less, then another group of people have to pay more in order to raise the same amount of money.
So
If the amount of money is fixed.
you're correct. And what we traditionally done is to say, let's see how much money is available and send it to 80% of the people. And to do that, you've got to change that $90,000 number so that 80% of the people be eligible, and then see what the taxes are.
Yeah, so it really is a policy decision. It's how do you want to adjust the impact and the tax liability? And the only thing that I'm saying, the only point of this slide that the committee looked at and talked a lot about is the fact that because it's self-balancing, it's a zero-sum game when thinking about it.
That's right. So
So-
somebody's gonna pay more for somebody who's paying less.
Absolutely. And for the
Okay,
last
so what
several
are we
years,
arguing about?
from the last several years, we know who's paid more. They're the people
All
who
those
no longer
awful
are
people are
eligible.
paying making $125,000 a
And
year.
I
Run
think
the
that
numbers, run the numbers.
Well, we will, but we're gonna have to start wrapping up, because
You can run the numbers overnight.
see
we
that's
have the numbers.
that's one of the challenges is because so there's a lot of because it's based on house site value and income, when thinking about who that tax burden should be shifted onto, you have to look, or you may want to consider the two factors. So I've got an example here because the committee was talking about changing the house site cap for households under 90,000. So that's how I picked this was based on the committee's discussion. So say you were to increase the house site cap for households under 90,000 from 400,000 to 550,000, which was one of the proposals the committee was discussing.
House site value.
Yeah.
House site value, yeah.
Which is what causes the slope after the 90,000
Okay.
number.
Yeah, so
But that's what is going up right now.
So right here, I'm saying, let's just assume for the purposes of a simplified example that we're only going to be changing the house site value cap from 400,000 to 550,000.
Okay, no, this is for an example. That's not what we're doing.
This is based on the committee's discussion
This is your
from last week.
sample math problem you're putting on the blackboard.
It's
Okay.
not there, right? Have it up there.
So that means that households with incomes from 47,000 to 90,000 and a house site value less than 400,000 would receive no change in property tax credit because they don't have additional house site value to get more of a property tax credit on. But as we spoke about, because this is a tax expenditure, property taxes are going to need to be raised. So that means that those households between 47,000 and 90,000 of household income and house site values below 400,000 would see an increase in their property taxes. Households under 90,000 with a house site value above 400,000 would see an increase in their property tax credit because they'd be able to apply their property tax credit to more house site value, which would mean generally they would have a decrease in their property tax liability. But individuals may vary, right? So if you have a very small change in your property tax credit, but your tax rate goes much higher to cover the tax expenditure, then it could be that you don't see a decrease in your property tax. And I am cognizant of time, but I do think it would be helpful.
Senator McCormick had a question before.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a question, it was a request. And I think we're probably out of time for it. It's very clear to me that the witness has gone to a lot of trouble to present to us a well thought out coherent argument. And I have been unable to follow it because she has gotten one part of the argument and then we're off on another discussion. And then we come back and we renew, and I would need to have the presentation start from the top.
Okay,
I
and I,
can't jump in the middle. And so I've got to say that I have a sense that I have missed a really good bit of testimony.
okay, and I think we have been getting distracted. And we don't have time to let Julia go through this. The only point I would make is she's not making an argument. She's presenting the financial facts as to how the system works. She is not advocating for doing anything. She's saying, if you choose to do this, this is what the numbers will do.
I'm using the term argument, I guess, in the philosophical sense, a logically constructed presentation of an idea. And I wanted to follow the logic because logic, you've got individual statements, but the individual statements have no meaning at all except as how they flow from the previous statement and how it leads to the next statement, and that the relationship, the logical relationship, and that gets lost. I mean, and I don't want to pick on this committee. It happens in 2023 in America a lot. But it finally gets down to that. Then you hear this. It literally sounds like yeah.
Okay,
And there's no meaning because it gets interrupted all the time.
I think your slides are, you gave them to Jill, right? And they're on the website.
My slides are on the website and
Okay, so you can sit down and look at them and get some questions, and then we can have Julia come back.
I would be happy to come back and talk through this. And I think that while we don't have time to get through all of the slides, I think that this is one final example that might
So
just
we
be.
went through the soft touch, which is you just raised we did the numbers, the income and the house site value. And what we saw was that some people, maybe people we don't want to, would pay more. But that definitely, because it's a zero-sum game, then the amount of money we have to raise is the same. If people pay less, then somebody else has to pay more to get to that thing. And that to me is very logical. I don't think there's a fallacy in that one.
Mhm. And I think, and what we were looking at before was big picture income groups. And then what I've tried to put together here is, for example, households.
The sledgehammer.
So the sledgehammer was the concept that the committee was talking about, where by adjusting the property tax credit system, you can make change, and you can make significant policy change, but it can't be as nuanced as the committee was trying to target in its discussion. So that was the reference of the sledgehammer, where if you tweak these numbers, you're going to be impacting everyone in different ways. So this example here was the anticipated change in tax liability. So this should say for example, households. And this is the same scenario. So this is going back to the committee's conversation from last week, where we're assuming the house site cap increases from 400,000 to 550,000 for households under 90,000. And just what would that look like for different households if that were to be the only policy change? So what we see here for household A, let's say that household A has a household income of 50,000 and a house site value of 300,000. All else equal, that household is going to see an increase in property taxes with this policy change. Household B, income, these are all just examples, income of 50,000, but instead of having a house site value of 300, they have a house site value of 500,000. Because they now have more house site value they can use the property tax credit on, it would see a decrease in property taxes.
Okay, the first one would increase because they're already getting the full value of their house.
Exactly. So you would have two households, they have both an income of
Same income.
50,000. The one with the lower house site value would see an increase in property taxes, and the one with the higher house site value would see a decrease in property taxes. And the same would hold true with two households, 80,000. It's the same logic. The household with 80,000 but a house site value of 300,000 would see an increase in their property taxes, whereas the household with an income of 80,000 and a house site value of 500,000 would see a decrease because they would have an expansion of their property tax credit. So I thought this was a helpful picture of seeing how it is self-balancing. So you need the dollars need to be coming from somewhere. And in this example, the dollars would be coming within the same income group to pay for others in that income group.
What we kept trying to do in the income base was to move that burden upwards. Basically, that happens because we set tax rates. And the folks that are already income sensitized and limited, they're not going to see any greater cost. But the folks that are getting greater income sensitivity are going to see a decrease. But we make up the difference by raising, if we,
tax rate, but which is now.
or yield, or
You
whatever we
spoke
want
as
to
a
call
yield.
it. Yeah, right, it's the same thing.
But they, but those rates, the tax rates, which are now called yields.
Yeah.
Are not the same population as residential property, school taxpayers.
It
They
is not.
include non-residential.
Yes, they
property.
do. We don't send any kids to our schools.
Correct.
Okay.
And don't pay income there.
If they earn it here, they do.
Yes, but they are not, if they wish to benefit from
Okay. but-
income sensitivity, they can.
No, we're not
They-
talking about them.
Yes, we are,
No,
because they
no,
supply money.
no. We are talking just this example, not where we can go. In general,
That's where we do go.
unless we raise the taxes and go away from that, everybody floats at the same rate. Unless we increase taxes on the folks that don't go to school, don't send kids to the non-homesteads. As long as we're dealing with homesteads, this is how it floats. And we have to raise the same amount of money. We're not seeing a big increase in non-commercial, that's already figured in when we go to set tax rates.
So when property values go up, the
Yes,
property values in non-residential property
yes,
sell at the same rates, their values go up.
yes.
Are we cutting their tax rates?
No,
Well, then there is extra money coming from that group.
yes, but that's all been, you're getting specific to a specific budget. You figure what Julia has said, and correct me, is that she takes all that money. No, you don't. You take all the commercial,
So the way that the yields or the tax rates are calculated is we say, okay, what are the total expenditures coming out of the ed fund? What are the non-property revenue streams flowing into the ed fund? Then everything else needs to be raised on property taxes. We've got the homestead property tax and we've got the non-homestead property tax. In my yield model, which calculates all of this, all of the tax rates, local adjustments, everything, there's the equalized grand list for the non-homestead properties by town, and there's the equalized grand list for the homestead properties by town. So the legislature,
equalized grand list. So you're not seeing a huge bump this year.
Equalized grant list is town to town equalization.
Okay,
It's the coefficient of expansion. It deals with houses next door to each other going up.
but we have set a 3-year rolling average so that no town gets hit up or down with a huge fluctuation.
So that's for the
per pupil
CLA.
cost. The per pupil
Okay,
takes money based from that, based
okay,
on per pupil.
we are overtime, and I think it's Friday afternoon, and we're not gonna make any progress.
Okay.
Okay,
So I will talk to Catherine then, who was at the creation of these
good,
three,
maybe she can
this
speak your
three-dimensional
language.
stuff. Maybe she'll talk to Deb Brighton, who was also there, and maybe even,
Deb Brighton gave us the incomes based suggestion.
yeah, she.
Well, let me tell you, she didn't model it out very far.
She modeled it out far enough that it could be adjusted when needed. And we seem to be stuck on adjustments.
Senator, I spent an intense 3 months. Remember when you called me and I was on Cape Cod and I was on a meeting and couldn't talk? Well, I was on this committee, sitting, looking at the ocean, talking about property taxes. That committee, by and large, wanted to go to an income.
Yep.
Okay?
Oh, they tried
And
all
we
over.
tried every which way to do that. And we could not find a way to do it. Deb Brighton was there. Despite everything we did, we could not find a fair way to do it. So at least that the committee could agree on. But we need to lower the scope. We started talking about what would happen if we just raised the house site value back to the 500 or 550 that it was a few years ago. And we need to focus on that. I think you may know too much to be helpful to the rest of us. You are in 8th grade and we are in 1st. And you need to give us time to get to your level of understanding.
They have the ability,
Fine, they,
JSO,
yeah, okay.
or the trio. That if you will recall, when we used to go to town meeting, we would know how much we put in, what the property tax rate was, and it would run for each town, the value of the house based on their budgets. And that, the computer could do that overnight.
Yeah,
I could do that for you, Senator. That's in my model.
I mean, if the computer does it,
Well, I will add you to
But-
the quartet instead of the trio.
but that's not what we're talking about. Is you can do it by town, but we also have tried to keep towns from seeing a huge bump in their property tax because the major building in town burnt down.
You're trying to see them not get a huge bump in their local education taxes.
Right. We've tried to do that. What we're afraid is the house values are going to cause that bump, and that's what we haven't been able to do. But if we try and do it just by raising the house value, we need to understand that some people with even lower income, depending on the value of their house, are going to pay more than they do this year. And some people are going to pay less. It is not all gonna flow to the rich people.
I agree, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Friday afternoon is a tough time.
Yes.
And no one is suggesting that you do it only on the value of their houses.
Well, that was what the discussion was. Okay, that's what Julia prepared for. She listened to the discussion when Stowe was in here. And she said, do you understand this is what will happen if you do that? And I said, yeah. And why don't you come in and explain it to the committee? She's not the enemy. You just talk to your friends like they're the enemy.
No, It's my job,
Yes.
sharing what has been
Yes, being confirmed, Senator. Okay, we're going on to another fun topic on Friday afternoon.
Well, I'm glad we finished this.
Uh-huh. Now you know what my fall season was like. Okay, yeah, we asked Ellen to do some drafting for us. We are going to listen to what she drafted. This was in the way of a or a study committee and we are not voting on anything because I've got 2 members out. And I'm going to, we're gonna walk through this, we're gonna think about it, and then we'll come back in the first of the week and vote it out. Okay. All right.
Ellen Stankowski, Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm here on H110, and so you have a strike all amendment, which is draft 1.1 dated today. So I did it as a strike all. It also could just be a single instance of amendment, but it does sort of depend, because I haven't heard
The only thing on
specifically.
there, the other one was extending the deadline.
Right.
So whatever we add is longer than that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So section 1 is the sunset deadline. As it came over from the House, it was July 1, 2026. I want to confirm that that's still the number you want. And then the second section is a report. And so I did try to glean what you were talking about, try to distill what you have been talking about. So section 2 is on or before January 15th, 2025. So that's, a year and a half. The Commissioner of Public Service, in consultation with the PUC, shall report to the General Assembly on the process of siting telecommunications facilities under section 248A. The report shall address how to make the process easier to participate in for municipalities and individuals, how to encourage municipal participation, and recommend any necessary updates to section 248A. The Commissioner shall hear from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, the utilities, and any other interested parties.
Okay, the only thing I might pull is, we had talked about January 2024.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay,
All right.
I mean, we were asked to only do the extension for 1 year, but I think we need to give it more time, because if we decide to make changes, then you're in some law, and if we don't get it all done, we're into a new legislature. And so I think that would be my one correction. Senator Gray.
Yeah, that I agree. Given that there's some sense of urgency to the complaints, having something sooner rather than later is helpful. I just don't know if we've had a chance to ask the commission whether or not they feel like it's a workable schedule.
This is what I talked to Commissioner Tierney about. Did you have any communications? Yeah.
I have not had any
Yeah,
communications.
but that, we've been talking about next year, because we were talking about.
To Commissioner Tierney, that we talked to the Public Utilities Commission
Yeah.
about it.
I mean, that's
Yeah, and no one has
Is that
said
data
no.
realistic from their perspective?
Well,
And then in terms of producing the report, who does the report go to?
us.
you should
To the,
ask.
to the
Yes.
study warehouse where, and
Well,
all the
that's
things
where
we
we'll
have
go.
read.
Yeah, the committee on finance, the committee on, what are they over there now, energy and
Environment and energy.
environment and energy. I don't think these go through anybody else.
Such as island toys, that's where.
Okay, see, this is why we got drafts. Okay, with those 2 changes, Senator McCormick.
And I ain't saying it's so, but just to raise the possibility. Might we not read this as kicking the can down the road?
And your proposal is?
Well, that's a different question, Senator.
We've been kicking this can down the road for a decade.
Well, yeah, that's,
We requested last year and we tried to just.
We really
take-
haven't.
Yeah.
And so I don't think this is, one of the things that we've heard here in the committee is that the process is daunting for a lot of people, particularly individuals, that for some people at least, it isn't working as well as it should. And the notion of getting information, how do you make this faster? How do you make it easier? How do you get more publicity out to people who are affected? How do you get the communities and leagues involved? And how do you get input from all those people? I think is a useful thing to do. And I think it's also useful to be charging the department and the PUC about how do you deal with those problems that folks are raising?
And the league, I mean, the league should be the communications link to the towns. Why do the towns not get involved because they don't care?
Well, I think it's also going out to people.
Yeah.
To individuals, because that's one of the things we've heard is irrespective. We've heard in some cases municipalities don't move forward because of their perception about the process. Not saying that their perception is correct, but that individuals don't move forward because it's a daunting process.
Right.
And I gather that I don't get the sense that the legal profession is particularly enthusiastic about what they have to go through on behalf of their clients in order to do this, even though I guess from what we've heard from the PUC, well, the fact of doing pre-filed testimony makes it easier and clearer and so on. And is that in fact the case of people who are caught in the system?
I think what I heard was right here, that we set up the hearing system. And it is very legalistic because we were as close as possible mirroring the Act 250 and, using all the same criteria, but in order to make it go faster, this is part of, and did we tell you to do pre-trial or did you just make that up?
Pre-filed testimony.
Yeah.
That's a great favor of PUC. We've always used pre-filed testimony. It's not unique to 248A. That is in every case. And many state agencies and environmental court use them. I'm not sure if they're using it still, but they did use it at some point. So it's not unusual.
All right, no, but maybe, we can look at that. A very legalistic system is not going to work for the average person. It's not going to be easy. So if we want to make it easier, we might have to give on the other side, but until this committee tells us.
Well, again, we make them that it's easier to have in-person testimony and so on and so forth, but then, it's not going to be faster.
Right.
And that's that's also a criteria, which is why I think asking the department, the PUC to look at this and say, come on, what can you do to make this better and easier? And then asking for people, what do you want? I don't think that hurts to do occasionally.
Okay, I've got Senator Bray and Senator McCoy.
And the other thing too is if we sort of open it up, make it more conversational, it could be that there are lots of applications that don't merit, that are uncontested, simple, move straightforward, and you could just add some time to lots of, I don't know how you distinguish the ones that seems like you want to have an easy way for people to say, we'd like to slow down this one, but not slow down everything.
I think that's why we're kicking that can down into somebody else's ball field. Because
I think the
it
last thing
does,
the public wants us to do is look at this opinion decision right now, since we screwed it up to begin with.
that's never stopped us. Senator Connor.
Since the senator from Franklin has answered my rhetorical question, I'll stand down on that matter. But I also.
I'm really nervous about this.
I want to say.
These questions.
I want to say in defense of that 250, that part of its beauty is that it is quasi judicial and quasi part mixing. It's actually not that legalistic.
Okay, but we're not talking about you.
Right.
We're talking about this.
I'd come up.
Okay, I'm going home and I'm not going to hear about 250 or Act 60 all weekend. All right.
What's your cell phone number?
It's off.
Freeze the glasses first. Okay, that's part of the trick.
All right. This is what we've got. I think Ellen's gotten the direction such as we can give her today, just with those 2 tweaks. It's up and published, I think, or will be momentarily, so that anybody that's interested can see it and get in touch with us, if they've got concerns. And then I really would like to get this one out. Because my sense is we're gonna start getting deluged. I know, they say we can be on in the morning, but we're on the floor at 10 and morning committees can meet before that. And unless we give up lunch, I think we're getting an extra hour a day, so. We're gonna keep muddling through, but I think this one I'd like to get moving. I'd like to have time to work on the income property tax stuff, and maybe we won't be able to figure out, well, if we want to do something for next year, we're gonna have to make some decisions this year, so that's where we're going to go. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I get you out at 3:30 on the winter, but the driving is fine today, so we'll make it.
Good job.
Scare them, you know that.
Pardon?
I'm the only one you don't scare.
You understand this?
They understand it better than I.